Magnesium is integral for 600 plus biochemical processes in the human body, and yet most people are deficient. Common signs of magnesium deficiency include fatigue, muscle weakness, stunted growth, poor immune function, poor concentration and memory, hormonal imbalances, bone and teeth problems. Most people think grabbing a bottle of whatever cheap stuff on the shelf or at the top of Amazon will solve this. The common misconception is that consuming more magnesium will automatically improve health and well-being. The truth is there are various forms of magnesium, each of which is essential for a variety of physiological processes. Most people are deficient in all forms of magnesium, while even those considered healthy typically only ingest one or two kinds. Consuming all 7 of magnesium's primary forms is the key to accessing all of its health benefits. That's why we pack 7 forms of 450 milligrams of elemental magnesium into each serving of Wild Mag Complex. 1 dose a day is all you need. Learn more and grab a bottle today at wildfoods.co. Use code GENIUS for 10% off your order.
Okay, and he was, by day 3, she was crouched behind the chair, really scared, and there wasn't really anything there, behind the Christmas tree, crawling under the windowsills. Finally, I called a colleague of mine. I said, okay, can you come over here and just take a look? And he did, and he said, you need to get him to the hospital or to a doctor right away. So I called the 3rd day, and it was a different pediatrician I called, and he suggested I take him to Vanderbilt right away. Said it sounds like an acute onset of PANDAS, which I'd never heard of before. So we did rush to the emergency room, and me, believing that physicians would understand what was going on, since physician had told me to go there, just thought, check him in, let him know he might have PANDAS, and they would take care of it. Well, that was the furthest from the truth, and it would take several years to undo or unwind what was actually occurring. So we ended up in the hospital for 3 days.
Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes, and as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers, because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button, and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD, and working on a product to help people overcome these problems, because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up, and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Forget frequently asked questions,
common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast, now part of the Finding Genius Foundation. We're going to talk to the author of What's Wrong with My Child? And America is Infected. Her name is Elizabeth Harris. She's a science-minded business owner with more than 20 years experience in the field of wellness. And we're going to talk also about the root cause of many autoimmune conditions. So, Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for inviting me, Richard. I'm looking forward to this.
Tell me a bit about your background and how you got onto this topic. I've seen a lot of people have personal experiences with topics like these, but go ahead. What's your background?
Yeah, it's usually like survival of the fittest, right? So I have a degree in biology and minor in chemistry, and then master in sports medicine for Cooper Institute. I was in the spa business and doing really well. I had 2 children, biologically 2 adopted children, when my 10-year-old, next to the youngest boy, came down with some very scary symptoms after a group A strep infection.
What do you mean symptoms? Like what?
He began walking back and forth between the kitchen and the living room over the transition strip, like very OCD. At the time, I didn't know what OCD was because I hadn't really seen it before. And 27, 50 times he had to walk with his left foot first, and then the clothes weren't dry enough. I needed to boil his toothbrush. All of these very extreme behaviors or action, and then I contacted the pediatrician, and he said, oh, he's just being a kid. I'm like, okay. But then on day 2, he began building this monstrous tent that overtook the living room with every chair and blanket in the entire house. I called the doctor again. He said, oh, he's just playing hide and go seek. I was like, okay. And on day 3, he was crouching behind the chair in the living room, and his pupils were huge. Kind of felt things on his skin, and he seemed very scared. At the time, I didn't know what the symptom of paranoia was or whatever. I think he was just scared.
Well, a quick question. It sounds like you're moving away and back towards the microphone consistently. It's making the audio go up and down. I don't know if you can just stay closer or just notice that.
Okay, yeah, and he was, by day 3, he was crouched behind the chair, really, really scared, and there wasn't really anything there, behind the Christmas tree, crawling under the window sills. Finally, I called a colleague of mine, and I said, okay, you come over here and just take a look, and he did, and he said, you need to get him to the hospital or to a doctor right away. So I called the 3rd day, and it was a different pediatrician I called, and he suggested I take him to Vanderbilt right away. Said it sounds like an acute onset of pandis, which I'd never heard of before. So we did rush to the emergency room, and me, believing that physicians would understand what was going on, since a physician had told me to go there, just thought, check him in, let him know he might have pandis, and they would take care of it. Well, that was the furthest from the truth, and it would take several years to undo or unwind what was actually occurring. So we ended up in the hospital for 3 days. I guess psych somehow got in there, which I didn't know the difference between the specialties. They all had white coats on. So they would ask me questions. I felt like they were all from the same team. They were not. They did a spinal tap. They did all kinds of testing. And they let me know that he was still positive for the group A strep. And he also had pneumonia, which they didn't tell me at that time, but I learned later. And they gave him IV antibiotics, and the symptoms went away. And so they sent us home with a referral for cognitive behavioral therapy and a prescription for Zoloft, which I thought was just...
Well, why would they do that if the antibiotic worked?
I thought that was a bizarre solution to this. And when we were checking out, I was like, okay, whoa. And I had learned that his anti-DNA titers were at 1480, which is really, really high. That's actually group B strep. But at the time, I didn't know that. And I asked them, I was like, okay, so what is he diagnosed with? And, he wouldn't let me see the chart. I was like, what's going on? So I honestly just reached over and kind of grabbed it. I saw it said psychosis, like NOS, not otherwise specified. And I was like, okay, 10-year-old kid, 11-year-old kid doesn't just randomly come down with psychosis. It goes away. It just doesn't, none of it made sense. But, you have to do what they say, or you're accused of not obeying them. And so we went on and did 30-something CBT visits and tried the Zoloft, which he didn't like at all because it wasn't the right treatment. And then about a year later, it happened. And, he did have some ups and downs with symptoms throughout that year. And, it's hard to know when they're that age. Are these behaviors? Are these symptoms? It's just like this constant guessing game. And so when it happened the second time, I called a CBT therapist and I demanded she come to the house. And I was like, I'm not going to keep paying for this therapy if this is medical. And so when she saw him, she said, I'm not going to see him anymore. He needs to be seen by medical for more rule-outs. But then, of course, medical wouldn't see us and kept saying it was behavior. It was just awful. It was just horrible. And mother's intuition.
It sounds like you're back and forth with no help.
No help whatsoever. And I guess being a scientist, and I had developed some devices. I was a trainer in my industry, national trainer, and I'd seen a lot and done a lot. And so I couldn't help but observe these patterns. And it was like, it would kind of come in waves. And sometimes this uptick in symptoms or behaviors, whatever you would call them, would last a day or two, sometimes 4 or 5 days. But with the group A strep, it was really, really bad. And so I didn't really understand what was going on with those differences. But in the 8th grade, our pediatrician said, in 7th grade, I'm sorry, she did something really bizarre. And I knew he was in a flare, is what I was calling it, a flare up. And I told the school administrators, I don't think he needs to be at school. But if you don't take him to school, then the cops come and charge you with truancy. So now you're bouncing between psychiatric, medical that doesn't know what to do. They do, but they're not doing it. And then now you're adding cops. I think it's just like, how is anyone supposed to function in this place, And I did consider to school under force. And of course, he did something really crazy. And then the principal threatens him with a felony. And I'm like,
Jeez.
nuttiest thing I've ever experienced. So, I'm listening to the doctor trying to, even though I'm losing a lot of faith quickly. And he says, well, it's your parenting. And I thought, well, if that's the case, I can easily fix that. So I stopped consulting and I stayed home with my 3 children, all at the nanny do, and stayed home with them. And I implemented this program called Total Transformation in the Home. And we stuck to it like glue. I mean, I already kind of parented like that anyway. So it wasn't a big deal. I just laminated the charts and, put the marbles up, color coded and everything. And it just didn't make any difference at all. But the thing is I could see his heart, and he didn't like to upset anyone or bother anyone. And if somebody told him he was doing something wrong, he was very upset. He was just so sad, and he just couldn't make it to the Friday to get the reward. So I backed it up like Wednesday and tried to do it like that. Because you just can't parent every child the same. And so I guess it was this morning, May of 2013, when it really got horrible, was he got group A strep again. And this is only the second time we'd had experience with actually that organism. And this time, it just overnight immediately went to a whole new level. It's like an overnight change. And the nurse had called me and said, you come get your son, he's sick, and come pick him up, bring him home. And he's just defiant. And he's never been defiant before. No, kids, I don't want to, or I don't, please don't, they know why I beg, but never had he just outright been defiant.
Magnesium is integral for 600 plus biochemical processes in the human body, and yet most people are deficient. Common signs of magnesium deficiency include fatigue, muscle weakness, stunted growth, poor immune function, poor concentration and memory, hormonal imbalances, bone and teeth problems. Most people think grabbing a bottle of whatever cheap stuff on the shelf or at the top of Amazon will solve this. The common misconception is that consuming more magnesium will automatically improve health and well-being. The truth is, there are various forms of magnesium, each of which is essential for a variety of physiological processes. Most people are deficient in all forms of magnesium, while even those considered healthy typically only ingest 1 or 2 kinds. Consuming all 7 of magnesium's primary forms is the key to accessing all of its health benefits. That's why we pack 7 forms of 450 milligrams of elemental magnesium into each serving of Wild Mag Complex. 1 dose a day is all you need. Learn more and grab a bottle today at wildfoods.co. Use code GENIUS for 10% off your order.
Yeah, it sounds like it was affecting his mind a lot.
It was affecting his mind. I felt awful as a parent from giving in to the pressure of the teachers and the cops and the principals. I just feel horrible. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now, because, I succumbed to all of these pressures, and I've been threatened. He's threatened by the juvenile system at the school. He's threatened by I think there was another, the total transformation say, well, that's what you do next, take him to juvenile. I didn't know what juvenile was, so I said, well, you can either go to that juvenile or you can follow the rules. And he chose to go to juvenile. At the time, I should have known that he was not right. He wasn't able to make that decision,
How old was he at this time?
Can you hear me okay?
How old was he at this time?
I'm sorry. He was 13.
Yeah, difficult age. Okay, so what happened then? Keep going.
That was torture. If I thought the school was bad, that was 1,000 times worse. It was just full of people that had really no interest in helping children get better at all.
Well, it's jail essentially for kids, right?
I couldn't believe it. I was mortified. I thought it was going to be a center, a help place. And I talked to the officer about it, and he explained to me that there were services and support and all these things, and that was just absolutely not the case at all. And that really put a lot of pressure, and I won't go through all that. That's in the book. But as it came down to it, I had found him a place. I got him had to get him IVIG, intravenous immunoglobulin, took him all the way up to Maryland to get that. And it did help some, but it made him worse. And she tells me this after I get the treatment. It's $18,000. Makes him worse before getting better. And so anyway, she had an uptick when we got back and ends up back there in solitary confinement for 5 weeks. I couldn't even wrap my head around it.
And you couldn't get to him because he was in there like that? That's horrible.
I couldn't get to him. They cut us off from everything. It was the most traumatic experience I could ever imagine that anybody's gone through and lived through it, you know? I mean, he's got this neurological condition, and then they put him in a single cell. They say it's a single cell, but it wasn't at all. And I won't get into the other things that happen in there because we're kind of currently in a case with it. I'm not supposed to talk about it, but I don't even know. So anyway, now we compound the situation with PTSD. And so I think that's why I wanted to write the book and educate people on this because, you know, if I'd known what to do in the beginning, if just one person had said, hey, antibiotics, long-term antibiotics, this is why, this is what's going to happen. They start, and this is what's going to happen if you don't keep taking them. He would have never experienced any of that. Our family would have remained intact. I wouldn't have lost our home. I mean, on and on and on and on. And then deal with these awful lawyers. You know, it's just a mess. It's a disaster. And I don't know, you know, I hope.
Well, where are things at today? Have you resolved it or where are you at with it?
Well, that's the thing is I knew that if I didn't figure out what it was that we were all going to, I don't know, I just felt like we weren't going to make it. So I ordered I'm set up appointments with like 8 different specialists. A lung specialist, I had 32 vials of blood drawn and analyzed it all. The only thing he had that was abnormal was a mycoplasma infection. And mycoplasma pneumonia is just like walking pneumonia, but he didn't have any of the symptoms of pneumonia. And I had his genes tested. We did a $10,000 genetic test. He didn't have anything wrong with his genes. Nothing. So ruled that out. Then we went to this doctor and that doctor, an immunologist. His immune system was fine. It was literally ruled everything out, just one thing at a time. And I thought, well, it's gotta be the micro. It just has to be. This is the only thing that's left. And so even though it didn't make any sense to anybody else, you know, I just went on a mission to find out how mycoplasma could cause such issues. And honestly, once I just got away from everybody telling me wrong things and just focused, I was able to get there. And as it turns out, this particular organism had been genetically modified by a team of, well, it's actually scientists, the Army Pathology Lab, the Department of Defense, I guess, Texas prison system, and they had kind of teamed up. And the way I understand it, they were working on a bioweapon for Iraq. And I think at the time we were selling them things. I usually don't get too deep into that, but I will say that they use the death row inmates as their testing ground, which I've learned off to do now in these private prisons. And, you know, this little town of Huntsville, Texas, unfortunately caught the brunt of it because, you know, you've got an Army general involved in microbiology. That's not a good thing at all. And even though the scientists let him know clearly that, hey, you know, we are going to genetically modify this and create this, you know, insidious infection that no doctor can ever find, it's going to cause all crazy symptoms.
Well, look at the past 3 years. See, no harm in that kind of stuff, right?
Well,
But go ahead, keep going. Go ahead.
no, I mean, it's so true. And, you know, it was a little hard for me to tell this story, but then after COVID, I was like, well, there's round 2. But so, you know, you've got an Army general and you've got this infectious disease guy saying, hey, you know, there's all these consequences we haven't thought through. We should wait and go kill it, you know. But here's the thing. Took a mycoplasma fermentans bacteria, which is typically found in the soil, is very benign. I mean, it's a very small genome, like I think 464 pairs, I think. And then you take that and you weaponize it. So you actually splice in some genetic code from HSV6 or HHV6. You are in one strain, you give another strain an EBV, another strain HIV, envelope protein, and then you make it antibiotic resistant, and then you make it heat resistant so it can withstand the heats of the Kuwait Desert, and then you infect someone with it. Well, here's the problem. Is the person that you're infecting is a live host, a living host. And it doesn't matter that they're in death row inmate, because they also are sharing co-infection. And so you give them this organism, and then you have genetic transference between Mycoplasma fermentans and Mycoplasma pneumoniae. And then voila, all of a sudden, these very pathogenic qualities of this, bioweapons now is in this airborne infection. So not only that, now you've got Mycoplasma pneumonia that can transfer its genetic pathogenicity to store up the coccal pneumonia, which is in our sinuses. Like that's our nasal, pharyngeal flora. And so it's just like, okay, so now we've got this situation in our country, and no, the problem is not the antibiotics. The problem is not the physicians. The problem is the fact that they will not admit what they did so that everybody can get the correct treatment. That is the problem. And so now we all have this myriad of autoimmune diseases, all these psychiatric issues. Now their solution is monoclonal antibodies, Humira, all these things. But honestly, doxycycline or minocycline in a combination with Cithromax, or, there's a protocol for it. Really, my son and I actually feel great. I also had a horrible autoimmune disease. I didn't know it was connected, but, in uncovering what was going on with him, it was also the root of what was going on with me.
How did you find out that the military was doing this? How did you find out all that info?
There's a patent. Well, and I also read a lot. Well, I found out about Dr. Nicholson, Garth Nicholson as his name. As a scientist, you don't really trust everybody and what they say just on its face. But because I had gone to school back when he had discovered the phospholipid nature of the cell membrane itself, and I was very aware of his work, and it was in all of our textbooks, and, he was kind of a hero back then. I totally believed him when I got on the website, imed.org, and I clicked on every article, and I read every single publication he had, and I just was bawling. I was just bawling, and I just couldn't believe that this would happen in our country, and that, it would stay hidden and concealed, and all these people would be so sick and not have a clue what was wrong with them. And then on top of it, be called crazy or be called it's all in your head. No, it's not. It's not in anybody's head, or it's in the cells. It was.
How many people how do you think he got exposed to it? How many people were in that local area that got exposed?
Well, actually, I guess it's good and bad news was that my ex-brother-in-law, who's since passed, was actually in the Texas prison system. Maybe the 90s. So, and then he came to stay with us afterwards. Like, he was getting on his feet, and we welcomed him in, and he carried it with him. So here we are in little Franklin, Tennessee, which used to be a really nice place, and we all get this crazy thing, and we never know what's going on. We did get really, really, really sick in the beginning. Deathly sick. It felt like what people describe as how they feel with COVID. That's what we felt like then. In 2003, my sweet little poor son that's gone through all this was 2 at the time, and he was so sick his lips were parched, and it was awful. But yeah, and it's very slow acting, because once you contract it, you can either contract it right away like we did, or you can contract it with 24 casual exposures. And to be honest with you, about this point in time in our country, we've all been exposed to it at some level. I see clients at a spa, and just the change in everyone's health from then to now is just incredibly sad. And nobody knows what's wrong, and everybody has all these weird things, and it's just like, I used to try to tell everybody, and I just kind of at this point, because then you get into like, well, just tell your doctor this, or ask them this, and it's just a lot to try to get them going on the right path. Now, if they're really sick, I will try. But at the end of the day, it is just long-term antibiotics that makes everyone I worked with clear out, primarily.
So you're saying that has this become widespread enough, this particular pathogen, that most people in the U.S. have been infected, or are there multiple instances of this, and most people in the U.S. have been infected by at least one of them? What's your overall arching thought here?
Well, everybody, this onslaught of anxiety and ADHD and all of these things, all these symptoms. Now, the one thing is, it's not as simple as I'm making it sound in terms of this one organism, because you've got all these combinations and all these co-infections. And that's the thing is, I did go back to medical school just because I wanted to see what they were saying about it. So they let me, I took the first class, which was awful. And then they let me fast forward to the infectious disease class. And the thing, although I like the instructor, the thing that I just found so confusing was that there was no instruction on co-infection, an interplay between these cytokine cascades. And so it's just, this one for this. No, and you cannot approach it that way. It's a myriad of different organisms, and there's a lot going on with that. But there are some primary ones that can make a lot of difference clearing people up. But I would say everyone has some form of this now, at some point.
How did you find a way to treat him?
Thankfully, Dr. Nicholson had a protocol on his website, and I was really afraid for the safety of not only him, but, everyone. And I'd seen some things that if this went untreated for too long, there was some really bad things that could happen. So I was able to get some antibiotics for him, but then I understood that if I had it, 2 other kids had it, and I learned that the animals get it. And that was kind of one of the things I did. I knew he had it. I took our dog to get tested, and he had it. When the vet had argued with me beforehand, like, he's not going to have it, his dog's over having it. So I'm like, please, just test the dog. I'm so tired of arguing. And he came back positive, so then I went and got tested, and I was positive. And I thought, well, even if he gets better, then we're just going to reinfect him because it's airborne. So we all got on the protocol, and I ordered it from India. And I did hate to do that, And I took the first one and waited a few days and made sure it was safe. But our situation was life or death. And I think at this point in time, in fact, I will work with several physicians now. So if anyone wants to, I highly recommend giving I could care of a physician. Or Dr. Oakes, he does a wonderful job over on Columbia Avenue with treating these syndromes that are caused by these chronic intracellular infections. But it's not just the mycoplasma pneumonia. That's just the one that I happen to key in on. There's the Lyme that was up in Plum Island. They actually spilled the ticks over or whatever that story is. And that's a tough one to treat. But the Lyme doctors tend to overlook the fact that there's the co-infection of the mycoplasma pneumonia. And so a lot of those patients don't get as well as they could if that was addressed. And then there's also the chlamydia pneumonia. So we basically just say that across the board, most things now just assume they're resistant, sensitivity testing should be done. And you're not going to find it all the time by blood, and it's not going to be IgM. You're not looking at the IgM. The IgG is actually the indicator of chronic infection. And,
What is IgG and IgM for people that don't know?
Well, like IgM is the body's initial antibody response the first time that it sees an organism. So basically, like you're an innate immunity. You have these defenses that the first time I catch COVID or whatever, I'll get the first round of antibodies, and my body will do X, Y, and Z. But once I've seen that organism, then if I catch it again, my adaptive immunity, and that's the IgG. And so, that's also a mistake I see a lot of physicians make, is they'll just only look at the IgM, but that's just not going to get the patients any better,
All right. So what conditions appear to be amenable to this treatment regimen?
I would say most of them. I mean, I hate to say that. There's
your book was on autoimmune conditions, but what kind of conditions?
So a lot of psychiatric, believe it or not, bipolar. Now here's the thing, schizophrenia, a lot of these psychiatric conditions can be treated with antibiotics. And here's the thing that's important to know is that molecular mimicry is what is behind an antibody attacking. So if you have one of these pathogens inside of your cell, and then an antibody is created, and let me just back up and explain it, and the audience can probably grasp it. These organisms will come in from the outside of a cell and actually kind of latch on. The mycoplasma pneumonia has a P1 adhesion protein that actually attaches to the cellular membrane. It takes approximately 3 hours to infect the cell. Now, once inside, it colonizes. But for that period of 3 hours, you've got antibodies that are recognizing this foreign, object or foreign pathogen inside the body, and the antibodies are being created against this pathogen. However, it is basically, if you for lack of a better word, is stuck to the outside of the cell. And so you've got host cell proteins in combination with the proteins of the mycoplasma just sitting there holding on, and antibodies are created against host cell protein. So from then on, you have this situation where when your body encounters that particular organism again, whatever it is, the antibodies that are going to attack are also going to attack self-tissue. And so that's the premise behind the, molecular mimicry. And so unfortunately, because antibodies aren't destroyed, that is something that each patient has to identify what the organisms are that were involved in like the onset of whatever disease they're facing, and recognize that, for the rest of their life, they have to manage not catching that disease, that pathogen. And then,
but if antibiotics work, I would guess that these mycotoxins, et cetera, are at least susceptible to it. Otherwise, why would the antibiotics work?
Right. Oh, absolutely. And so, that's the other piece is you've got the actual organism themselves inside of the cells, and then you've got organisms in the bloodstream. And then you have the antibodies that were created as a result of the invasion of the organism on your tissue. So you got kind of three things going on, if you will. And so, yes, you can, the infections can, clear out for the most part. Sometimes if they get down as the bone tissue, that takes 10 years for those cells to turn over. But if you come off of the antibiotics and then you are exposed to that again, then you will, react with the similar responses you did have before. You see what I'm saying?
Well, then how are you supposed to help somebody if the antibiotics work, but they don't work forever?
Well, I mean, it depends. And you help them by assessing situations. Like if you had a child in a home, they would stay on the antibiotic prophylactically. And sometimes you could do like 3 times a week because if mom, dad, sister decide, we don't have symptoms enough to go through all this. We don't feel like we need it. Okay, well, that's fine. But then little Johnny has to stay on prophylaxis until he moves away. Or it might be determined that he needs to stay on prophylaxis forever. I mean, and this is not a new concept. And this is what confuses me so much because, in rheumatic heart, it was well known and well accepted that you put someone on penicillin prophylactically forever because every time they would catch rheumatic, catch strep, then it would give heart damage, And so I don't understand the push-pull in our society as of today, other than initiatives. But yeah, you tease that out in terms of what you're talking about. Keep in mind prophylactically. And then once they get married, if they're new spouse and they have kids, they could eventually probably come off of it if either everybody gets treated or they're married someone.
Yeah, but being on antibiotics, it hurts your microbiomes in your body. What about supplementing and trying to improve your microbiome instead of just taking the antibiotics for a very long time, which could be incredibly detrimental?
Right. That is something that deserves another show, actually, because that requires looking at each class of the antibiotics and understanding that the microbiome is not susceptible to all antibiotics. It's just like, we've got Zithromax that targets this organism, and this one targets this organism. But, minocycline, the tetracyclines actually are bacteriostatic versus bactericidal. So they don't go in and kill the organism. They just prevent replication. So I've seen, dermatologists put teenagers on, tetracyclines for 5 years, 6 years for acne, and the kids were fine. So
but if you stop the certain bacteria from proliferating, it'll help to the microbiome or the oral microbiome of someone before they start this. And as they take it, see how it changes.
Yeah.
That's the reason that you are able to get off the antibiotic at some point, because maybe there's enough bacteria built up as an alternate. Once one bacteria has been stymied, then now the microbiome has changed and it's able to protect the person without any other intervention.
I would have to agree that in some cases, maybe in a majority of cases, that's probably true. There are going to be some cases that are so extreme, like with my son. But if he gets strep, there's just you would never believe it unless you saw it with your own eyes. So I know for him, he will stay on prophylaxis. But I would say that in most cases, I would have to agree with you. But yes, absolutely. changing the microbiome and making sure that those play. But, you know, it's just how to measure that. That's the thing. It's just a little difficult to measure. And what do you, I mean, yeah, no, I agree. Probiotics are key. They're definitely key. And I think what I'm talking about today is, you know, when somebody gets on a program, you want to, I mean, do all the normal things too. I'm not saying that just doing this alone is going to cure someone. You know, it's putting everything together. But I think that what I'm talking about is the missing component of people being able to get their life back. But I will say that, you know, it is not easy. It's a very, very tough protocol to get through. And if you just start swallowing antibiotics, you will get deathly sick. If the doses will beat you high. And, you know, that's why a lot of these symptoms like gut problems, all these do get attributed to antibiotics. And I feel like that's a short, you know, wrong answer sometimes, because if you do have a lot of pathogens in your gut and you kill off a large amount at one time, you are going to have a lot of cytotoxin release, a lot of an immune response, and your body is going to launch everything in its power just to get the good bacteria body parts, if you will, out of your body. So
maybe a better protocol would be to take, you know, one of these cyclines, that's just cycline, just less bacteria that would release cytotoxins.
yeah.
You know, if you're able to get their numbers down from, I don't know, 5 trillion down to 50 billion, maybe that would be a better protocol.
Yeah. And I would, and that's why I do think people need coaching, you know, through it, because you have to work with every client, you know, because they'll just go gung ho once they understand it. They'll understand the first part of it, and they'll just go sit this on and everything to kill the bacteria, and then they'll end up like, you know, not in a good place. So you have to say, okay, do you want to go slow and explain it all, and then kind of coach them through it? And, you know, if you get pretty tough and they don't understand die-off, like the Herxheimer response is, yes, the short term, almost kind of maybe 5 to 7 days in, they'll get kind of like a fluish feeling, but afterwards, there's still a lot of die-off. Like the symptoms unwind backwards. So like if you had, I don't know, for me, I had chondromalacia when I was like 28 for running, the runner. And I remember, and I think about maybe 6 weeks into the protocol, my knees bruised up, they were hurting so bad. I was like, what in the world? And then I finally realized, okay, I get it now. It's unwinding the symptoms. So where you've been colonized, you know, they get into all the tissue. I think that our symptoms might come from them colonizing initially, because it is painful and problematic. But then I think once they're in all the cells, then they go somewhere else, and then the symptom kind of isn't so bad, but they're still there. So then when you go to start unwinding it all, you know, I had swollen ankle. I mean, it was awful. My ankle swelled so big because it's honestly very fascinating subject. And I could go on for hours and hours and hours, but we don't have that long.
Well, what about you're infected with a given bacteria or other toxin, trying to look at the metagenomics of that toxin to see what biological processes or metabolites it's creating that your body may be using? Because then when you stop its function or slow it, maybe that it produces a certain molecule that actually is, you know, maybe some molecules are harmful, maybe there's some that are helpful, maybe it's taking over the job of other, you know, microbiome, flora, fauna that were doing a certain job. So again, through metagenomics, you may be able to see that, and that might give you more insight as to what will happen once you start to attack it and get rid of it, or what to replace it with.
Well, I mean, certainly that deserves, you know, some research and, you know, some testing. I would say that is possible. I don't know. When there's something that comes into your body is so pathogenic, I don't know. I mean, it's definitely worth looking into. I mean, and I think the more people that become aware of this, the faster we're going to be able to get the solution, because certainly it's not, you know, convenient or easy to go through the treatment protocol. And, you know, we've been told such bad things about antibiotics, but I mean, I've seen people on them for years. And I mean, honestly, yes, in the beginning, my stomach hurt really, really bad, you know, but then it goes away. And then you'll get this one thing. And I didn't do anything for it. I didn't do any treatment for any of those die-off symptoms. I just started Benadryl. You could do Benadryl 30 minutes before you take yours at night. I might do, charcoal, activated charcoal throughout the day to soak up some of the cytotoxins and to reduce the immune response. And then that usually knocks all that out, or the majority of it. But that would be really good and helpful to see what you're talking about.
Well, I can see like it requires many areas of study and a lot of work. What really needs to be done to characterize the best way to help people because they're different, the infections are different, et cetera. But just trying to give ideas on maybe how to improve the process or understanding it better.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, we're just so quick. We go in and, psychiatric medications, it took me a while to learn that, psychiatric medications are immunosuppressants. And so they simply put a lid on the immune response. I even heard, I guess it was, because of course when I first, kind of figured this out in 2014, everybody thought it was crazy, but I really didn't care because it was true for us. And now people send stuff to me all the time and they think they just added a recommendation for antibiotic to be added to a psych med to help with the results. And I know those ketamine infusions for PTSD, the only thing that's supposed to make those more effective is if you add antibiotics to the IV. And so there's just enough evidence out there now. And then, of course, I think that COVID, like you said, I know that we were working on it in 2003, and then it was some ethics committee that got, really upset over it. Because
you're trying to help people without enslaving them to drugs for the rest of their life. So, of course, it's unethical. And they have to stop it. Yeah.
It's horribly unethical. And so what is the solution? To just fund it, but just move it to a different country. These people just make you sick, but we won't get into that. So when we get the COVID, that's the different kind of spike protein, but I feel like the goal was, let's take all these people that are chronically sick and just go ahead and knock them out. And I'm just like, this is parasite. That's what it is.
Well, all right. So your book, again, what kind of feedback are you getting? What are the most common conditions that people are coming to you for help with?
Well, I have done some post-COVID vaccine work. I've done some post-COVID work. I've got Parkinson's, Bandis, of course, which is now, I think, known as autoimmune encephalitis. I think lupus, ALS, if you catch it early, and then you have to get a doctor to help with that. If you're a little more advanced, then the IV antibiotics you really have to do, start with that to get a good kickstart.
It'll be interesting if of all the bad organisms that you've run across, I've thought about this before. Probably ideally, someone should get their microbiome looked at, at least the gut microbiome or oral microbiome for a simple proxy, like every 6 months. And then if you get sick and something happens to you, you can look at it now and see what's different.
Yeah.
And maybe work to correct it with probiotics and selective antibiotics, et cetera. But if people had a good baseline like that, they'd probably come from a point of a lot more knowledge on how to help themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes, I totally agree with that. And it's like making sure that initial baseline, that polymerase chain reaction testing is used and that you're not missing anything on the front end. Because sometimes, so often, it's hard to know when you're going in somewhere to get a test, you really know, hey, are you running IgM and IgG? We're all supposed to have to also be physicians, but unfortunately that's where we are and pay for ourselves. So it's like, okay, what are you running? What are you tested for? I'm like, it's just a simple blood panel or your analysis is going to tell me. So it gets a little complicated, but I 100% agree with you. Baseline is mandatory.
So where are you going from here? Are you going to do more books? Are you continuing the study? Like, where do you want to take this?
I am not sure as of today. I recently just made a very huge discovery a couple of weeks ago that has my head spinning. And so now it's like, okay, it is this group of people, these private equity firms to continue to do these horrible things. And it's like, do we spend our time like trying to go in behind them and basically figure out what they did and then spend 10 years getting a solution and everyone suffers, or do we stop them? Somehow do we stop them? And that's where I am today. I'm like just tired of it. And it comes at these ICE detention centers up and they have these contracts with these, they get these foreign countries. And it's just a mess. And how do we stop that? Because I don't know. So I've been contemplating that very thing lately.
I don't think you're going to be able to stop any of those bad actors, but you certainly could refine and improve the what you learned and then offer it to people. Some will take it, most won't, but that's probably my guess is what you could do.
That is true. And then even if they're just figuring, in learning kind of how their minds work so far, it's basically the same gig. They'll come up with an adhesion protein. It's kind of coming from the same group. And then, I just think on my doxycycline, I never got COVID. I didn't get the vaccine. I don't do any of that. And I just, typically stay on it. Sometimes I'll miss a week or something if I'm busy, but I just stay on it. And I just wonder if that's not something that can offer some protection, even, like just 3 times a week or something. I don't know. But it's just a sad situation. But it's really good to have someone like you that's shining a light on things and making sure that audiences that can, possibly do something about it or help with the treatments are getting this information.
Well, so if someone suspects that them or someone they care about has a problem that your book can address, obviously get the book. I'm sure it's on Amazon and everywhere else. But in the medical community, where have you found any interest or any traction? Like functional medicine doctors, homeopathic doctors, or is nobody willing to touch this?
No. There's a lot of people that are willing to touch it. Sometimes their approach is some things that don't really people work that well, but there's a lot of people trying to treat it. And so that's encouraging. I really highly recommend Dr. Oakes, and he will see patients like on Zoom. If somebody is like completely against antibiotics, we have our Plan B program, which is our Zytoscan, and we use research nutritionals, which are nutraceuticals. They're not supplements. And we do the scanner, and we can assess situations like that as well. Doesn't seem to work quite as well, but there's just some people that just will not do antibiotics. So that's totally fine. But what's wrong with mychild.com is the website that you can go to. You can download a couple of chapters of the book. Yeah, take a look and read the book and then reach out via our contact form. And I'm happy to answer any questions or help anyone that needs any help. But that's Elizabeth Harris, what's wrong with mychild.com. And just go grab a couple of the chapters and see if it's recognizable. I will say that, I kind of stopped at this point, and I'll just mention that in that town of Huntsville, Texas, where they did the testing, AS, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, ALS, was up 5,000 times higher than the rest of the country. Now, this is back in the 80s. Now it's high everywhere, but that just kind of also gives you some of the syndromes that this organism I'm talking about actually was responsible for. Gold 4 syndrome, autism, it's just on and on and on.
Craziness. Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And, I know you're sharing this like incredibly frustrating, painful nightmare scenario, but thank God you're doing it. And I appreciate you being here and talking about all this.
Well, thank you so much for allowing me the chance to share it. And, we are actually pretty good today and things are much better. And this really does make me happy being able to help others. So thank you so much.
Excellent.
Magnesium is integral for 600 plus biochemical processes in the human body. And yet most people are deficient. Common signs of magnesium deficiency include fatigue, muscle weakness, stunted growth, poor immune function, poor concentration and memory, hormonal imbalances, bone and teeth problems. Most people think grabbing a bottle of whatever cheap stuff on the shelf or at the top of Amazon will solve this. The common misconception is that consuming more magnesium will automatically improve health and well-being. The truth is, there are various forms of magnesium, each of which is essential for a variety of physiological processes. Most people are deficient in all forms of magnesium, while even those considered healthy typically only ingest 1 or 2 kinds. Consuming all 7 of magnesium's primary forms is the key to accessing all of its health benefits. That's why we pack 7 forms of 450 milligrams of elemental magnesium into each serving of Wild Mag Complex. 1 dose a day is all you need. Learn more and grab a bottle today at wildfoods.co. Use code GENIUS for 10% off your order.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.